CMJ's Epic Quest. CMJ's Epic Quest. CMJ's Epic Quest. CMJ's Epic Quest. CMJ's Epic Quest.
Hey everybody, welcome back to D&J's Epic Quest. I am Jay Rule. Justin, joining alongside me here is
Derek Cronus. Derek, I felt like you had to think about what you were saying there for half a second, Justin.
I did. It's been kind of an exhausting week and a half, to be real frank with you. So
yeah,
just getting prepared because I have to do this 8-minute presentation when I get to Reno. Upgrading technology on a cycle, so to speak. So just preparing for that and summarizing, reading. I got sick with bronchitis last Monday, and I've just been knocked out by that pretty much. Otherwise, yeah, we probably recorded this last week sometime.
I forgot you were sick. I know you said you didn't have a voice, but hearing you now, I mean, I wouldn't have known. You sound fine. Sound good now, back to your normal self.
I definitely sounded like I had been screaming my head off at a metal show for 3 days straight.
Oh, however, you were not.
Exactly. That would have been much more enjoyable than coughing my lungs up.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, it's good to get back and do this again here. Yeah, it has felt like a little while here. Yeah, things come up, sickness happens, so we'll get on when we can get on here. So
yeah, that is very true.
Well, start this chapter. This was a pretty big one. The first chapter of the subbook, and I will say it didn't really go the way I thought it was going to go.
Well, how did you think it was going to go? Or is that a conversation for later?
I think we can talk about it when we get there.
Sure. Well, I guess before we get started in today's episode, we'd like to take a moment to thank and recognize Silverstone's Books. Please check out their website at silverstonesbooks.com, as well as their recently opened storefront. They do have a large selection of fantasy, sci-fi, and horror books, with many of those being signed copies at pretty decent prices. The store also carries a very large number of indie authors, so help us help them in supporting those self-published authors. Also, they've been gracious enough to give us a promo code for 10% off your next order. That code is DJQuest, so check out their site, pick up a book, and save some cash while supporting some self-published authors.
Definitely. Yeah, I know. I was hoping we'd get down there soon, but I don't think I'm going to be able to make it this month. I know there was a book signing there that I was hoping I maybe could make that swing, but we've got dance competition that weekend, so ain't going to work for me. But yeah, sometime we'll have to get down there.
Fair enough.
And on to our patrons. We have Jan the Picker, Luciana Etrigan, Ryan the Topological, Damien the Rock of Faces, Nate Fiddle Me This, Shield Anvil Dylan, Calvin, and he gave us a nickname now. We have Calvin, He Who Witnessed Wallace, Livia the Malazan Potato, and Aaron Mott Irregular Parker. I guess Calvin, Aaron, if you guys would rather that we don't use your last names, I guess let us know and we'll take them out. It's not a big deal. Whatever you guys want there. So
hell yeah. Well, I'm glad that our little chain of dogs has little pet names. So that's great. That's great to hear. Thank you all for your patronage. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of opposite of the chain of dogs in the last book. While their numbers dwindled, ours have grown slowly. So that's a good thing.
that is definitely a good thing. We do not want that.
Right. Well, Yeah, I think this will be a fun chapter to talk about. I read it once and then I reread it as I summarized it. So I read it twice here. Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure we'll have some good stuff to talk about here.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it was definitely a very interesting chapter. Some very subtle details that I almost missed. But it wasn't until I read the chapter again after I was kind of coming out of my sickness where I'm like, oh, that's fucked up. Yeah,
Well, yeah, you and I were texting, and there was a detail that I definitely missed that you pointed out, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at that time.
for sure. Absolutely. Well, we ready to kick off chapter 14 of Memories of Ice here?
Sure. I guess maybe we should just preface this now. I suppose maybe we want to have like a trigger warning or content warning. There'll be, I guess, I don't know what kind of conversation we'll have about it, but rape does come up in this chapter. So I'm sure we'll have something to say about it, but I guess I don't know at what point exactly time wise we'll get there and what exactly will be said. But if that's a thing you don't want to listen to, I'm sure we can put in some time markers, to skip over that.
Yeah, for
To
sure.
be not, I can't really think of the word that I want here. I guess to be sensitive to that subject.
Absolutely. I will do my best to put a timestamp in there, post production. Know that it is coming up, and I think happens in the second or the third section. I would imagine that it happens fairly quickly.
Well, I think it was one of your sections, or was it mine?
It was
I
yours.
thought it was one of yours. It was? Okay.
It's toward the end of your third section.
Okay. All right. Well,
Chapter 14 epigraph here. The last mortal sword of Fenner's Revi was Fanald of Con Vor, who was killed in the chaining. The last boar cloaked destriant was Ipshank of Corelry. I can't say that word. Who vanished during the last.
I don't know.
Yeah, Corelry.
I don't. It doesn't really flow off the tongue very well.
No. Who vanished during the last flight of Manask on the Stratum ice fields. Another waited to claim that title, but was cast out from the temple before it came to him, and that man's name has been stricken from all records. It is known, however, that he was from Unta, and that he had begun his days as a cut purse living on its foul streets, and that his casting out from the temple was marked by the singular punishment of Fenner's Revi. Temple lives, Biren Thund. Have any idea on who that person is?
No.
Taborik.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's kind of cool to know that Haborik was going to be, he was next in line to be Destriant.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think too hard on who that could have or would have been. So yeah, that's kind of cool.
When it says it is known, however, that he was from Unta, and I'm pretty sure Haborik was from Unta, because that's where he was basically sold into slavery.
Well, and I guess he was cast out of the temple too. So yeah, it seems to make sense.
Right, ex-priest.
Right. All right. The epigraph for the chapter, a short one. If you can, dear friends, do not live through a siege. Ubi last the legless. Not a great outlook there.
No, not at
But
all.
I imagine being in a siege would suck.
Yeah, a lot of these sections, I'm like, man, I couldn't even fathom what's taking place here. So, yeah, I definitely feel like that epigraph hits a little close to home for this chapter.
I think I would just try to get out of before they got there to siege the city. I feel like it's kind of like a hurricane, right? Like they're coming, it's going to happen. So why don't you just leave before it gets there instead of trying to ride it out? We don't have hurricanes here, so I don't know. Easier, right. I guess, from my perspective to say that than to actually leave your home behind to God knows what.
True. But it also kind of seems like, and I get the feeling that the Mass Council has been downplaying the siege based on some of the things that we know from earlier chapters.
Possible.
So,
well, yeah.
And I would imagine that they're pretty influential amongst the Cappan citizens. Just my take. Could be right or could be wrong. Don't care.
What if one day you do care, Justin?
My last name is Carols, so.
You got care right in your name.
Yep.
All right, here we go. The inn on the corner of Daru Street held about a half dozen patrons, most of them visitors and stuck in the city like Gruntle. It had been 5 days and the Panian forces had done nothing outside the city walls. No one knew what Sepdark Kulpath was waiting for, though there were lots of ideas floating around. More barges carrying Tenescowri had been arriving, and it felt as though half of the Empire's population was outside these walls. A random person remarked that with the numbers outside the walls, there wouldn't be a bite for each one of them. Gruntle found it funny, but no one else did. He sat at a table and watched a mouse slink around from shadow to shadow. The mouse's nose knew there was food in the pantry, for now. If the siege drew out, well, that was a different story. He looked to the inn's cat as it slept, apparently only hunting in its dreams. Gruntle took a sip of watered-down wine. Gruntle had noticed there were only two types of patrons to visit the inn. Those who cohabitated the inn with him now, and strangers stuck in the city while nighttime would draw on the others. Those loud folk who would bring in the street whores with their coin. Those with a desperate energy, giving Hood the middle finger defiantly, saying they knew they belonged to Hood, but they couldn't have them till dawn. The door to the inn opened, and Buke entered, and he told Gruntle he was predictable and called him a fat iguana. Gruntle didn't really care about what he thought and asked what was next. Buke said he only wanted to thank him for the help. Gruntle asked if this was subtle irony. Buke said he was almost serious. The muddy water from Karuli had done wonders. Gruntle was happy to hear the good news, and if he had any more earth-shattering news to share, get on with it. Buke said he had met with the elders of the camps, and at first they wanted to go right to the prince. Gruntle interrupted him and said they must have came to their senses. Buke said it only took a little prodding. Gruntle replied that now he should have all the help he needs to keep the magic eunuch from playing doorman to Hood's gate. A panic wouldn't do with the 250,000 Panions outside their gate. Buke said he thought he would appreciate the calm, but he still needs his help. That didn't make sense to Gruntle, unless Buke wanted him to kick the door in and do a Chuck Norris roundhouse kick to the head of Corporal Broach. If that's the case, Buke would have to keep Bauchelane busy. Maybe set him on fire? He would only need a moment, and timing was everything. Once the walls were breached and the Tenescowri are filling the streets, then they could go to Hood hand in hand, singing happy songs. Buke smiled and said that he would be enough and took a drink. Gruntle finished his drink and reminded Buke he knew where to find him. Gruntle asked what else Buke had to say. Gruntle said he had heard Stoney had volunteered. Rumors said the Panions would begin their first assault any time. Gruntle said they would probably only need one, and if Stoney wants to throw her life away defending what can't be defended, then that's her business. Buke said there wasn't an alternative, no prisoners, so they would all have to fight eventually. Gruntle thought to himself, that's what you think. Buke kept talking, saying unless Gruntle planned to switch sides and find his faith, Gruntle said there was no other way. Buke's eyes sharpened and asked if he would eat human flesh to survive. Gruntle only said that meat is meat. Buke said he was surprised and that he thought he knew him. Gruntle cut him off, saying he thought. Buke fired back, asking if this was the man Harlow gave his life for. Gruntle raised his head and Buke took a step back. He asked Buke which camp he was working with for now. He said it was the Uldan. Gruntle said he would look in on him in that case, and for now, get the fuck out of his sight.
Man, Gruntle, I just don't know what to make of him as far as this section goes. I think it's important to kind of put a pin in kind of how he seems very apathetic towards the siege, right?
He just seems kind of indifferent to it, really.
Right. Now, I don't know if that's just like he's just so confident that he can like weasel his way out, or if he just is going to kind of go with the flow, right? Like, well, I guess if it means keeping me alive, sure, meat is meat, right?
It's hard to say because I don't know how you could feel confident about sneaking out when there's that many people surrounding the city. I keep having this like vision in my head of the city, and I keep feeling like the city is like backed up to the sea, like that's one of the like walls to the city, and I know that's not the case, but I just keep feeling that way.
Well, I mean, it is a port city, so I believe the east side of the city is pretty much damn near the sea. And then running along the north is a river. And then I feel like that river splits off a little bit, kind of southwest a little bit, if I remember the map correctly. So really, on two sides, they're kind of stuck.
Well, I know. I mean, there is some space between the city and the ocean or sea or whatever, because I know at some point, it says the city's surrounded.
Right.
Maybe you don't have as many people on those sides, but I mean, it still seems unlikely to sneak out at this point.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I don't think it's confidence. I think that Gruntle is just apathetic at this point, and I think that he's just biding his time.
I mean, what else can you do?
Right. I mean, you really can't. I mean, and it kind of goes back to how he points out the different type of patrons to this little tavern or bar or whatever, You've got the hooligans that are like, yeah, fuck death, like, right? And
Right.
then you've got the ones that are just biding their time. They're just hanging out, waiting to die, essentially, or waiting for the opportunity to find a new faith, so to speak, right? Death or find a new faith. I'm gonna go with new faith, man.
But I mean, do you think they're going to give you that opportunity to convert? Because I feel like that time's probably come and passed.
I feel like in most descriptions of the Tenescowri besieging a city, they always say like they had an option to convert and they didn't. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's implied, but whether every participant adheres to that, hard to say.
I don't really think there's any controlling the Tenescowri. I mean, maybe Annister can a little bit, but I think it's just a mad mob. Like the Septarchs don't really give a shit what they do. Like they don't arm them, they don't feed them. They just tell them to figure it out, right? So they don't give a shit if they just indiscriminately kill and eat people. Figure it out on them.
Sounds good to me, man. Like do your thing, dude. Right. Like, yeah.
Right. Exactly.
But I think it's funny, and I think that the chapter has more meaning when you pay attention to Gruntle in this particular moment, because it's not indecisive. It's indifferent, like you said, and remembering how the chapter starts off and going back after you've read the chapter and remembering that, and just how so many things transpire.
I mean, there's a lot that happens here.
Yeah.
I only had a couple thoughts here on this section. Some of these sections I didn't really have anything, just because there's a lot of shorter sections in this chapter, but I'm sure we'll still find things to talk about.
Oh, for sure.
This line where I don't remember which way it went. If Gruntle was saying, like you got to set Corporal Broach on fire or whatever, but I only need a moment, so timing's everything. Just there's still some humor there. I definitely had a chuckle reading that.
It was pretty humorous. Gruntle definitely has a very unique sense of humor, I think. It's very like dry but dark, sarcastic humor.
Which I appreciate.
Exactly.
Another thought here, Gruntle thinks to himself, that's what you think. And so just made me wonder, what is he plotting? What does he have up his sleeve? Like, would he really switch sides? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if he would. Maybe he would. I don't know. I mean, I guess we saw Talk, effectively switch sides. I mean, he's kind of a double agent, I guess.
Right.
But, he's still over there right now.
True, but look where that ended up. Or look where that ended him up,
Yeah.
He's in an embrace that he probably won't get out of for a very long time.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think it highlights my point about paying attention to how he feels about this impending siege.
Gotcha. My last thought here, Gruntle said there's no other way in referencing to switching sides and finding his faith. And I kind of assume that he's joking around, but then again, I don't really know.
And even readers at this point kind of being like, what exactly are you going to do? The questions that we have around his thoughts, again, are very polarizing to what happens throughout the chapter. That's why I think it's important.
Gotcha. Those were my thoughts on it. Did you have anything else?
The only one that I can think of is, did you notice any, or did you feel like there was any foreshadowing when it came to the cat and the mouse?
I didn't really think on that at all.
Because and again, without really revealing what's to come, I feel like the cat being observed by Gruntle as just chilling on some ceiling beam, like not even paying attention to the mouse that's like scurrying over. I feel like the mouse at this point represents the Panions. They're making their way in. The cat's just kind of unobservant of it. But later on, we see it pounce on a cockroach, right? Which I would think, as far as the animal kingdom goes, would have put it below a mouse, right? So I'm thinking the cockroach is representative of the Tenescowri. The cat is kind of representative of Gruntle and his journey, and the mouse is kind of a representation of the Panions.
Interesting. I didn't put any thought into that, so that's kind of a new perspective for me, but interesting for sure.
Yeah, that's all I had.
I like it. Well, let's roll right into your section here.
Fuck yeah. All right. Batan and Kafal sat encamped, meditating in the middle of the barracks. Since returning from the thrall, this was all they had been doing. Itkovian watched them from the entrance of the barracks. He thought to himself that the Barghast claim was not a mortal one, and they travel among the spirits. Brukalian had demanded of him, Itkovian, that he find out what the Barghast knew. He rambles off a list of possibilities inside of his mind. He had tried before and failed. He would try now once again. As he prepared to move, he sensed someone next to him. He turned to find Prince Jalarkin. He looked exhausted. Prince Jalarkin tells Itkovian that he must know what Brukalian intends, as he, the prince, senses a shaved knuckle in the hole. Sounding bitter, he explained that the mortal sword had no time for him. Itkovian said that the prince could ask any questions of him, as Brukalian has given him leave to speak. Prince Jalarkin's first question revolves around why the Karan Talani Mass have not marched on the Panian Empire, as they have defeated the Septarch Kel's hunters. Itkovian responds and explains that the Talan are here for other unearthly demands, and that they, unfortunately, know nothing about. They destroyed the Kel hunters because their presence was a direct threat to the Talan gathering. Jalarkin said that this answer was not good enough. Itkovian quickly recovers and says that while he agrees, there is perhaps another reason the Talan are hesitant to move southward. He explains that it concerns the seer himself, and the word Panion is Jaghut, and they were mortal enemies of the Talan. Jalarkin was silent for a moment and then stated that even if the Talan decided to march against the Panion, that decision would likely come too late for them. Itkovian agreed. Jalarkin then asked why the Talan were gathering here. The shield anvil hesitated and explained that the summoner of this gathering was in the company of an army marching to wage war on the Panion and relief of Capustan. Jalarkin asked how long, and Itkovian answered that they were about 5 weeks away. The prince said that they couldn't wait that long, or hold that long. The prince asked if the summoner commanded this army. The shield anvil explained that it was Brood and Dujek that commanded this army. Jalarkin was in shock at this answer and asked how long Itkovian had known. The shield anvil explained that preliminary contact had been made through sorcery. Jalarkin explains or demands to know about the army, to which Itkovian explains. Once done, he tells the prince that on the surface this information sounds valuable, but with them 5 weeks away, simply leave them to their vengeance, as this is all they'll likely accomplish. The prince interrupts and asks if these were Brukalian's conclusions or his. Itkovian said that it was both. The prince calls them all fools. He wonders now why even try to defend the city. Itkovian says that it was because of the contract. He interrupted again as Prince Jalarkin says that he doesn't give a shit about the contract. All he cares about is the lives of his people. He asks if they can create some type of defense near the west side of the city. The shield anvil says that they would all be annihilated and slaughtered. The prince stared at him with contempt and told him to relay his message to Brukalian, and that next time the prince shall be informed of all matters. Itkovian watched as the prince walked away. His thoughts went out to the prince, as he understood. A surge of bitter anger followed those thoughts and quickly pushed them away. He returned his gaze to the two Barghast, whose meditation must have ended. He walked towards them, and as he approached, he saw the shoulder blade of perhaps a deer, on the coals between the Barghast. They had begun a divination. The shield anvil had thought that these were more than just warriors, recalling Kafal's chant in the thrall. Kafal is a shoulderman, and Hatan is his counterpart. He stopped just beyond the rug. The shoulder blades started to form cracks. He knew what the cracks were meant to show something complex. He leaned closer to try and decipher what they were saying. They were speaking Barghast, to which Ikovian had a small knowledge of interpreting. Stranger yet, though, it seemed that the conversation was between three people. More cracks had appeared, and soon the bone would crumble. As the creature's spirit surrendered to the overwhelming power, the eerie conversation ended, and Hatan looked up to Ikovian. Ikovian prods to find answers, to which Hatan turns into a sexual excursion. Ikovian doesn't answer, but rather asks what she had learned. Hatan asked if this was his purpose, to get close to her, so that he can find out answers. Hatan questioned if this should be a game he is playing, especially with the likes of her. Ikovian said that she was right and started to walk away. She calls him a rabbit, and she should change his name from Wolf to Rabbit. Ikovian made his way back through the headquarters. During his walk to his destination, he mulls over how he feels his vows are crumbling, and the images of Hatan were not helping. He thinks to himself that gods care nothing for the rules that mortals bind to themselves. He reached the arms room and ascended the ladder to the rooftops. Carnatus was already there. Carnatus could tell that the shield anvil was troubled. He tells Carnatus of his interaction with Prince Jalarkin and Hatan. It reveals that his faith is assailed. The Destrian asked if he questioned his vows and his rules of conduct existed to only appease Fenner. Ikovian frowned and said that, well, yeah. Carnatus tells him that he's lived under a misunderstanding. The shield anvil asked him to explain. The Destrian explains that Ikovian has found a way to blur the distinction between his vows and his faith. Ikovian says that his explanation will unlikely release a flood. Carnatus explains that this would be the relief to his present feelings then. Ikovian raised his hand and said there was movement among the Becalites. Carnatus joined him. The shield anvil pointed to the Seer Doman getting into positions of command. They will assail the redoubts first, and with the mass council's Gidrath holding positions there, it may give them some time. Ikovian cut him off and said to find him his messenger corps, and to alert the officers and inform the prince. Carnatus agreed and asked if Ikovian would stay here. He nodded. Carnatus left. Ikovian was now alone, where he studied the killing ground and the preparations. He said to himself that it has begun. I feel like, again, well, not again, but I feel like this section is just very transformative and just kind of moving the story along. I didn't have a ton of comments on this one. I find it interesting, and I know that it's kind of been mentioned before, but the whole, Cal Hunters, they're clearly an undead type of teacher or undead type of creature. And I know that it's stated that it's a threat to the gathering, but I'm curious about that. And I don't know if you had any thoughts. Is it just because like the undead like to kill the undead? I mean, I feel like it's more complicated than that.
I don't know. Maybe it's just that simple though.
In this universe, I doubt it. But I just thought that was interesting and wasn't sure how to formulate any ideas.
I guess I don't have any ideas either, and so that's why I say maybe it's just that simple. So maybe it's not, but yeah, I don't have any different ideas.
Gotcha. Prince Jalarkin here, I can actually empathize with his position, right? Like, he is trying to do the best for his people, but the people that he's hired to help those people are not being 100% transparent with him. I feel like he has every right to be as pissed off as he is.
Yeah, I wouldn't be happy about that either, but I think that's the type of news you can't really afford to let out either, though, because if somebody overhears it, or the prince is going to tell somebody, it's just going to turn into a game of telephone, and then everybody's going to think that a rescue's on the way.
Do you know what the shaved knuckle is referring to?
I don't know. You think it's like Moonspawn or something?
No. We'll talk about it later.
All right.
I'm going to hold you in suspense here.
Just like I'm going to hold you in suspense with what I may have encountered as a spoiler potentially.
Totally forgot about that till now. Asshole.
Yeah.
Okay, is
Now,
this spoiler that
it's
like
been a little while since I've read the chapter, so I don't the shave knuckle thing. I don't know if I again, it wasn't something I really put much thought into. I don't know, but maybe when you say something, I'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, it's fine. Was the spoiler like mind blowing like your last one?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. I'll have to see how it plays out. I don't think so, but maybe it could be. I don't know.
Gotcha. Well, hopefully it's in this next chapter.
I definitely don't think it will be in the end of the book, but I don't know how quickly it will materialize if it's going to.
Are you sure it's a spoiler for this book?
Um, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, well, I don't know that it's necessarily a spoiler, but I don't want to tell you what I saw either, because then it's just it's just gonna start like spinning all these wheels like that. I don't want to do that until we have the reveal. And maybe it was just something somebody mistyped. I don't know, but again, it wasn't something. I was just scrolling through Facebook and I saw this post and I read it and then I was like, oh fuck, okay.
You gotta stop
So
reading those posts, man.
I
I
know.
avoid it like the plague. I know that you're kind of the PR person, so you're probably more exposed to it than I would be, but you gotta cool your jets, bruh.
Yeah, well, like I said, we'll see. So I don't know what's going to come out of it. One thing I was going to ask you about, and maybe it was just how you typed it out, but Prince Jarkin says he doesn't give a shit about the contract. He just cares about the people, his lives of his people. I don't really remember them asking if they could create some type of defense on the west side of the city. I thought he wanted to like make a run for it.
Yeah, that's essentially what he wants to do. Is he I didn't have a better way of wording it. I know exactly what you're talking about, but in the book they call it a sortie, which is like a defensive maneuver that is like an offensive stance. They take like defenders and like offensively get out of the way or whatever, you know?
Oh, yeah, I kind of thought that was just like, yeah, you got guys on horses riding out to like trample them and shit and like cut a
Right.
path through or
Yeah.
something.
I didn't know how to
Gotcha.
like I visualized, yeah, some type of like defensive escape, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I totally agree with it, Covian. They would get fucking demolished.
Oh yeah, yeah. They wouldn't have a chance.
But yeah, I thought it was kind of cool at the end here. We get Covian kind of going like, well, damn, like he's really reflecting on his vows with Fenner. And I don't know if Carnatus is just saying what he says out of convenience because they need Itkovian to kind of get to know Hatan a little bit more intimately. I get the idea that this is what they want him to do. So I feel like he's motivated to do that and tell Itkovian, like, yeah, it's okay. You're just blurring the distinction. It'll totally appease Fenner. Go ahead and get your dick wet. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, we know Hatan wants it.
she's begging for it, and like it kind of seems based on a lot more elaborately said in the actual book than how I summarized it. But I know that there were images of Hatan in Itkovian's head as he was making his way back to the barracks. And I think I fucked up the beginning. It's not barracks. I think they're at the thrall. So
I mean, I guess I don't remember, so
yeah.
I'm not going to hold you to it. But if somebody else corrects you, then you can't blame it on me.
Found myself quite a bit going back to the map when I was reading this chapter.
Like once the battle got going?
Yeah, just trying to like figure out where everybody is, so to speak, their positions, I guess you could call it.
Sure.
But yeah, that's all I have to say about that chapter.
Sounds good. Well, we'll get into the third section here. The streets within Capustan were quiet and empty. Gruntle made his way to the Alden camp and hammered on a door. A moment later, it creaked open. He stepped into the corridor where he found Buke, who told him that had been quick. Gruntle said the Panions were marshaling and messengers were going every which direction. Buke wanted to know which wall he was on. Gruntle said the north, just this side of the Lecter house. Then he asked if the bastard had gone hunting last night. He had forgotten to ask earlier. Buke said no, the camps were helping in that regard, and he seems to be a little rattled that he came up empty the night before. Rattled enough that Bauchelain noticed. Gruntle said that wasn't great news, as he would start probing soon. Buke told him there would be risks. Gruntle thought to himself, if they were to keep an insane murderer away from his victims, without the murderer noticing, and that the siege was about to start, what the hell had they been drug into? He spoke. Reminding Buke, he said, help is what was asked. And how are his new friends taking this? Buke shrugged, saying Corporal Broach preferred healthy organs when collecting for his experiments. It's the kids who are at risk. He said they had 4 homeless urchins or kids on the walls, blending in and also keeping an eye on the sky. Gruntle asked why they watched the sky. Buke quickly said if they tried the rooftops. This didn't make sense to Gruntle. Buke kept talking, and Gruntle quieted him and told Buke to listen. They could hear thunder coming from beyond the city's walls. Buke went pale and asked where Stoney was, and he wasn't taking Gruntle's ignorance for an answer. Gruntle named the place she was at, and Buke said it was loudest there, and asked why they were still standing here. Gruntle said it didn't really matter to him. She was a grown woman, capable of her own decisions. Plus, this wasn't his war. Buke told him the Tenescowri didn't care. They'd still eat him. The sound of the assault grew louder as they hit the street. They could hear all the noises of war. He thought at last it had started and would likely be over by dusk. Gruntle thought about getting drunk. Movement from above caught his attention as he saw fireballs arcing through the sky, striking buildings and the streets. He saw a giant fireball flying right towards him, and he dove for cover. Once he picked himself back up, Buke emerged, and Gruntle asked how bad it was. He said that it wasn't that bad and the fire was almost out, but they should find somewhere else to be. Fireballs did not stop falling into the city. Gruntle thought they might drive him mad, and that he'd have to pull Stoney away from the gate himself. If she defies him, he might just beat her unconscious and drag her away. He made his way to the gate, though it was hardly visible through the smoke. He could see the gate smashed to hell, and the opening was heaped with bodies. Towers on either side of the gate raining arrows down on those that entered. From the smoke, gray sword squads emerged with sword and shield in the front and crossbows in the rear. Not seeing any obvious officer, Gruntle approached one of the crossbow women and asked what the situation was. She said they were clearing out the towers up top. The sortie would be back soon, and they would let them through to hold the gateway. Gruntle thought they were nuts. He asked how long they would hold the gate. She said the sappers were on their way, and they'd have a new gate in a couple hours. Gruntle asked how many breaches there were and what had been lost. She told him she had no idea. There was movement ahead, and the soldiers were ready to engage, but stood down as it was a Lestari unit. The squad split and let them through. Every one of the first 30 through the ranks was injured. Behind them, the sound of fighting drew closer. Someone yelled that it was a Scalandi counterattack. Gruntle knew they only engaged in units of at least 5,000. Ranks formed up, preparing for battle. Behind them, more gathered, with catapults and trebuchets. The rear guard finally appeared from those making their way back into the city. Someone with command told them to break. They dropped their wounded comrades and ran for the ranks, while those who were left were claimed by the Scalandi. Then the skirmishers flooded in. Crossbows snapped off, taking out the Scalandi. The gray swords calmly reloaded, while a new front line of skirmishers reached the gray swords and were cut down. The passageway was filling with bodies, and the next wave of skirmishers appeared unarmed and drug their wounded and dead. To Gruntle's left, a tower door slammed open. Among those that came out was Stoney, her rapier covered in human gore, her armor in shambles. She was battered and bruised. She didn't see Gruntle at first. Her gaze was at the passageway and the skirmishers as a new wave poured in. Those in front again fell to crossbows, but those behind kept rushing in. Stoney yelled some orders, and the gray sword split and ran for the nearest alley where Capenthal archers waited for them to cleaver. I don't know what the hell I was writing there. Through all this, her eyes found Gruntle, and she called him over. He tried to talk, but Stoney just talked over him, saying they poured through the gate, up the towers, and over the walls. It was a room-by-room fight. The seer Doman had found her, but had let her live, so she hunted him down. She said she had carved him from the inside out, and fuck him if he didn't beg. It didn't work for her. Why should it work for him? The seer Doman was a fool. Her step slowed, and her face went white, filled with terror. She said it was supposed to be a fight, a war. That bastard. Stoney closed her eyes and had short, shallow breaths. Gruntle was at her side, careful not to touch her. He gently asked if she left anything of the seer dolman for him. She shook her head no. Gruntle said that was too bad, but any other seer dolman would work just as well. Stony pressed her face into Gruntle's shoulder. He told her that he had a clean room and they should get out of the fight for a little bit. There was only one way in, and he would stand guard as long as she needed. No one would get in, he said as he picked her up. Stony said she was able to walk. Gruntle asked if she really wanted to, though, and told her to nap if she could. He took her to relative safety, while the Scalandi died by the hundreds. Gruntle wanted to be on the front lines with them, killing, taking life after life. One seer dolman wouldn't be enough. 1,000 wouldn't be enough. He felt himself grow cold inside. There were no words to describe it, no words for what he would become and what he would do.
Getting intense, huh?
Yeah, it definitely was. A couple thoughts that I had here. It doesn't make sense to Gruntle why Buke told him that he told these kids to watch the sky. He tells them, oh, well, if they try the rooftops, but we know that the spacing between these buildings is pretty big, so it doesn't make sense to go to the rooftop. So I'm assuming he must have told these kids to watch for their soul-taken forms.
I would agree, and I didn't catch that until my second read through.
Maybe he told them in not so many words, but
right.
He must have alluded to it. Gruntle's thinking, this isn't his war, but it kind of is. And then obviously a little bit later here, it gets quite a bit more personal to him, but it doesn't matter if it's not his war right now. I mean, he's in the city, so it's become his war. I mean, he's going to fight and die, or he's going to not fight and still die. So I don't know. I feel like of those two options, you might as well fight and hope for the best, I suppose.
Right. But, I feel like this particular thought is before something we'll talk about in a little bit. So, and it is transitional a little bit as to where he was at the end of the first section, kind of that apathy. And now it's like, it's still a little bit apathetic to say like, oh, well, this isn't my war. It's kind of like denying what's right in front of you. It doesn't matter whether you see it or not. It's going to kill you. So either fight or flight, right? And he's just denying that. Oh, it doesn't exist. It'll be fine. So I think that,
right. I was just agreeing with you. Sorry, I cut you off again, but yeah, I was.
No, it's fine. I was kind of at the end there anyway, so it's cool.
But yeah, like you said, there's no standing to the side in this. When I read this, so this is, what I was saying is I was not expecting things to go this way, to have like, a gate kicked in, basically, like now there's a way into the city. I figured eventually it would happen, but I didn't think it was going to happen, basically immediately. And now the fight's changed altogether. It's a completely different type of fight. But what doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and again, it's not like I'm some fucking military tactician or anything, but like you have, I don't know, conservatively, you have like the city outnumbered like 10-1. It seems like just overwhelming odds. And you got one way into the city, and there's more than that, but even this one right here, and you got these skirmishers. Like, do they not have shields? Like, I don't get it. These guys are on the front line. You're sending them into a city. Get all these dudes like a freaking shield and just have them line up and walk into the city. The Malazans or the captains are going to shoot at them with crossbows. Well, they're going to hit shields. And you just march into the city and you kill them. Because, like, they don't have enough arrows to kill all of you. They can't focus everything on, the one opening into the city. So to me, it just seems like once you have a way into the city, this should be like over. And I don't know if they just have like no strategy, but to me, it just seems foolish. Or even if you just want to send the Tenescowri in first, let a lot of them die, whatever. But you can just keep pouring them into the city because the captains, I guess without magic at least, I don't think they could kill them fast enough to stop them. And the defenders are going to get tired. Like it seems like it should be fairly easy to overwhelm them once they have a way into the city.
Fair enough. I guess I could see your point, but I think that this just kind of goes as a, clearly Brucalion, Itkovian, and Carnatus have spent a lot of time trying to understand their enemy and strategizing how to best defend the city based on, what the city offers itself as far as defense goes. Whereas the Panians are just like, whatever, we have so much numbers, who cares? Fuck strategy. You know what I mean? And yes, it could play.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, I guess I can see both points. It's like trying to fit an elephant through a funnel, right? Like as soon as like the little bits of the elephant are coming out of the funnel, they're fucking dead before it can get out, And then there's just a blocked passage, and nobody can get through, which gives it gives the Capustan defenders the ability to like regroup, grab their wounded. You know what I mean?
So yeah, I agree somewhat. I just think, I mean, like, if you get a couple breaches in the walls, I mean, the captains aren't going to have enough fingers to plug all the holes in the boat, right? Like, it's just.
That's true.
So I wasn't expecting the fight to go downhill in the span of a few paragraphs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I know that I think it's explained in one of my later sections, but it sounds like, I think it's this next section. And I think that these sections are kind of meant to happen simultaneously a little bit. And and from what I understand is like they did attack like the east and the south sides at the same time. And then like the north and west were supposed to be like feints to try.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe the Panions are using a little bit of strategy, but yeah.
I guess moving on here, I think this is my last thought, and I know you'll be able to expand on this because it went over my head until you text me about it. But even now, like reading it back, I was like, okay, well, I don't know. I don't know why I didn't pick up on things, but it's pretty clear that shock is setting in on Stony. But it says her armor's in tatters and all this and that. I just assumed she had a hell of a fight. I didn't, and then you're like, oh, she got raped. I was like, what? Like, I did not pick up on that at all. But not like, it makes sense now. Yeah, I just thought, it was close hand-to-hand combat with, knives and a pretty nasty way to fight. So
yeah. Well, it was honestly, it was two subtle details, and I didn't catch it at first either until I reread it. But it's this, and I'm glad that you kept it in your summary. And it's this line where it goes, a seer doman had found her but left her alive, or let her live. So she hunted him down. She said she had carved him from the inside out, and fuck him if he didn't beg. It didn't work for her. Why should it work for him? Basically, he wanted her to beg while he was sexually assaulting Stony. She did the same thing, and that's why, like, as soon as Gruntle sees Stony kind of like come out the door, it's very descriptively described that her sword has bowels, right? So she pretty much sodomized the seer doman with her rapier, or her rapier, because it was said that there was like shit and entrails on it. I mean, he got what he did, but that's my guess. It's not explicit, but I think this is the reason why he has switched. His mentality is now switched because somebody he cared for got hurt real bad. Not even
I definitely agree with you.
Emotionally too. And now he's like, fuck it. I'm killing every seer doman. They're all the same. I'm gonna get my, you know what I mean? So that's why I think it's important to really pin how he feels in the first section, and even at the beginning of this section, just kind of just like apathetic, like, yeah, whatever, it'll be what it's going to be, and now this, like, it's a huge transition and well justified, Yeah,
it's just kind of like a revenge thing now.
Exactly. And it's funny, and I'm glad that I caught that. Like, I'm super glad, because like it felt really weird, because I know that in this section, and I don't think you summarized it, but as she's kind of explaining the whole seer doman thing, like Gruntle has this thought like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know what I mean? Like, he kind of feels bad, right? Like, he was just like, whatever, it's her business. She can die if she wants to, et cetera, et cetera. But like, he cares for her, whether that's like a friendship thing or like romantically, I'm not too sure. But he at the bare minimum cares for her, and I think that he feels partially responsible for what
Yeah,
happened.
he wasn't. I'm sure he feels like he should have been there to like defend her, or at least stand next to her and fight.
Right. Which also kind of ties into something that we read in chapter 7, but we will talk about that later as well.
All right. I think that kind of wraps up everything I had for this section, unless there's anything else you want to add on top or add in.
No, I mean, I love the chaos. One sec.
Yeah, there's definitely chaos.
All right. As Bruchalion had predicted, the slaughter of the Kel hunters by the Kron Talani mass had thrown the Septarch forces in disarray. The confusion had added days to Shield Anvil's preparations for the siege to come. The time for preparation has ended, and Ikovian was left to command the city's defenses. There would be no Talani mass or relieving army to come to the rescue. Capustan was on its own. From his position atop the highest tower on the barracks wall, he watched the first concentrated movement of enemy troops to the east and southeast, and the appearance of siege weapons, Becklights and the heavily armored Bechtelites, assembling opposite a port gate. Scalandi troops were behind and to both sides of them, Seer Doman shock troops and bands of Desandi sappers positioning more siege weapons. Sprawling along the river and the coast was a seething mass of Tenescowri. He had watched the assault on the east redoubt, already isolated and surrounded by the enemy. The Becklights pushed into the redoubt. The Gildrath had revealed their discipline, drove the enemy back, and raised another barricade in place of the door. The battle continued through the afternoon, and each time Ikovian drew his attention to the redoubts, they were holding their own, taking enemies by the score. Finally, near dusk, siege weapons were wheeled out to assault the walls. Beyond this, the assault on the city's walls had started on all sides. Through the Shield Anvil's messengers, he was able to tell that the north attack was a feint, and similarly on the west wall as well. The true assaults were taking place on the east and south walls, concentrating on the gates. Ikovian stood in the center of both assaults and was able to oversee the defense on both sides. He could be seen by his enemies, and a few attempts were made to take him out. None were successful, but the Shield Anvil knew that this was the first day, and those shots would become more and more accurate as time went on. But for now, he stood there, his presence a mockery to the enemy. As the Becklights and Bechtelites rushed the walls, Desandi bearing ladders among them, Ikovian gave the command to counterfire. The ensuing slaughter was horrific. As the attackers had no form of shield or cover, they died in appalling droves. Yet their numbers had them able to reach gates, and battering rams were used to breach the gate. The Panions, after pushing through the passageways, found themselves in a wide open concourse, where gray swords and Cappenthal archers launched crossfire behind barricades blocking side streets, alleyways, and intersections. The Shield Anvil's strategy of a layered defense was proving very effective. It had been so effective that they were able to stop defending the chase. It had been so effective that they were able to stop defending and chase some of the Panions beyond the gates. The first day belonged to the Capustan defenders. Ikovian stood trembling, turning his attention from the attack on the redoubts to observe the city. Entire blocks were aflame. He thought to himself, when would this shock him? He suddenly felt weary and rested on the Merloin. Carnata said from the doorway that the Shield Anvil needed rest. Ikovian said that he was right. The Destriant said that there would be no rest, as the other half of the attacking force would siege through the night. Carnatus approached, and with difficulty, because of the warrens, was able to rejuvenate Ikovian and deplete his weariness. He thanked Carnatus. Carnatus begins to explain that the mortal sword has been called to the thrall to give an account of the first day of battle. He also explains that Hatan and Kafal have moved into the main hall. He continues to explain that before he, the Destriant, had left the mortal sword, he had asked him to inquire on the Shield Anvil's efforts to uncover how the bones of the founding spirits will be saved. Ikovian said that he has failed in this regard and will likely not be able to try another attempt. Carnata said that this was understandable and would relay this info to the mortal sword. The Destriant strode to look over the east killing field. He asked if Gildrath still held the redoubt. Itkovian said that he was unsure. The Destriant says that the enemy is getting ready to organize once again. The Shield Anvil said that he needed more messengers, and his others were exhausted. Carnatus made his leave. Itkovian observed the masses of the enemy slowly inch their way forward. His messengers approached, and without turning, he tells them to warn the archers and trebuchets that the Panions are about to renew their assault. A score of fiery balls rose skyward from beyond the massive ranks of Panions. The missiles arched, sizzling as they passed high over Itkovian's head. Explosions lit the city. The Shield Anvil turned to face his messengers and told them to go. So I think that along with the third section and this section are kind of meant to be happening simultaneously, but just from different perspectives.
Sure. Yeah, different parts of the city.
So one of the first things that I thought is just the, and again, it kind of goes back to my artistic eye. I just can't even imagine seeing all of this right at your doorstep, and all you could do is just kind of watch in horror as things unfold. It was very, it's like gazing up at the stars and realizing you're seeing light from 4,000 years ago.
Yeah, you're just seeing all this chaos, and you're directing traffic basically, and I mean you can't be everywhere at once to help, and yeah, I'm sure it's a helpless feeling.
Right, exactly. So I feel like this section kind of answers a little bit of your questions from the last section. Did that make sense?
Which part?
Just the whole.
Oh, the feint and everything.
Yeah, the feint and Itkovian and Bruchalian's layered defense. Basically from what I understand from the maps, and this is why I looked at the maps quite frequently when I was summarizing a lot of these sections and even rereading. It's just hard to kind of find where they are. So the barracks that he's standing on are basically in the southeast corner of the city. And so he's able to see what's unfolding in the east gate, which is east or port gate, right? Because that's the side to the city, or that's the side to the sea. Or closest to the sea, I should say. And so that's where Stoney and all of those guys are partaking, right? Because the north is a feint, and from what I understand, the west was a feint as well. So it was particularly on the south and east sides. But yeah, I feel like the chaos that was the second or the third section kind of gets a little organized here as far as in my mind, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, they're still surrounded, but yeah, the two sides aren't really doing a whole lot.
Right. I really feel like Graceless Passion should have done what he did for Deadhouse Gates with this chapter as well. It would have been kind of cool to have a visual representation of where people are, where different events are taking place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was really cool is I know that you and I both had some questions, and we almost kind of aligned ourselves with the debate between the Mass Council and Itkovian and Bruchalian and Carnatus about the East Redoubt, just kind of sitting out there in the killing ground. It sounds like they're holding themselves well, which is only adding time to the fall of Capustan.
Yeah.
Which I think is good. I mean, I think that's exactly what they wanted to see.
It's a little surprising to me that they've managed to pull out. I think the odds are definitely not in their favor.
Right. I'm sure that eventually it will collapse or crumble. And I think there's mention of that later on in this chapter too.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's right at the very end.
The other thing that I thought was cool is just kind of Itkovian, he's definitely, he's being shot at, but they're missing. And him being up there, at least to him, is just a mockery to them. So I thought I loved that. I just thought that was cool. Just standing in defiance of the siege.
It's a bold thing to stand up there and be a target. I wouldn't like being shot at.
Yeah, exactly. But he knows that it's not going to last for long.
Right.
And again, the only other thing that I had to comment on this was just, when the missiles started to arch, just the description is sizzling as they passed high over Itkovian's head. I just kind of imagined it, like when you're a kid and you're watching fireworks for the first couple of times, just how awe-striking it can be and awe-striking it can be.
Well, and then you think, they're landing and things are being destroyed. People are probably being killed. And
Right. Like at this point, the siege is definitely underway, and it sounds like the first day is on them. I mean, they stood the chance.
so far,
They stood to live another day. But yeah, that's all I had really had for that particular section. Again, it was a cool visual. I felt like it captured and organized and helped us as readers visualize what was happening in section 3. I thought it was good. I liked it.
yeah. Should we continue?
Let's do it. Tell it.
Carnatus rode his horse through the Tyrrell concourse. The arch spanned 50 paces, had taken a hit and sprayed bits of concrete to the ground below. Flames grew from the damage, and Carnatus saw people flee from the building. Just to the north, there was another building on fire. He made his way to Shadow Street, not slowing his horse. On his left was the Temple of Shadow, and to his right, the Temple of the Queen of Dreams. He made his way to the Daru Spear, this district's main avenue. Ahead was the thrall, guarded by 3 squads of Gidrath with full armor and weapons drawn and ready. Though he was recognized and they waved him through. He dismounted and made his way to the great hall where he knew Bruchalion would be. Ahead of him, he saw another man, robed and hooded and without an escort. Carnatus wondered how this man had gotten past the Gidrath and was quite surprised when the man waved a hand and the door before him opened. Carnatus sped up to catch up and caught the tail end of an argument. He slipped in the room and saw Bruchalion at the center of the room facing the mystery person, while Hitan and Kefal sat on their rugs. The Wrath priests didn't look very pleased with the situation, and the mystery person stood with hands folded. Carnatus could not see this man's face as he shifted to address the priests. Wrath Hood demanded to know where their Gidrath were and why they hadn't answered their call. The man said they had heeded the call of their dreams to avoid any unnecessary interruptions. Carnatus was able to finally see his face and recognize the man as Caruli. Caruli asked for permission to address the mass council. Bruchalion yielded the floor to the displeasure of the council. Caruli said the representation of the council was inadequate and that he would be joining the council with his title, Wrath Cruel. And he warned the rest that there was one among them that would betray them all.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah.
Pretty short section here. I didn't really know what this, where Cruelly saying that they'd heeded the call of their dreams to avoid any unnecessary interruptions. I don't really know what that is referring to. I don't know if you had any ideas.
I think it's referring to what's to come as far as our next section with Caruli. I think it's kind of meant to be a cliffhanger, but I feel like it's foreshadowing what happens to the thrall.
The glowing thing or something else?
Yeah, I can only imagine that it's like a foreshadowing to the protective sorcery that surrounds the thrall a little later on.
All right. Works for me. Yeah, I wasn't really sure.
Or it's to kind of foreshadowing the unveiling of whatever this betrayal is, right? I can imagine that would be an unnecessary interruption.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's my guess. It's hard to say, but it's clear what's happening in the section, right? It's transitional. Carnatus is moving from the barracks on the southeast side of Capustan and making his way almost all the way across to the other side to the, near northwestern part of the city to enter the thrall. Caruli is there. He's making his way in. He pretty much says that y'all are insufficient, so now I'm joining your tribe as someone who's going to tell you how to run your shit.
Which was surprising to me. I wasn't expecting that. And then he's like, oh, one of you is going to betray everybody else. Oh, okay. Who's this going to be?
Leaves us off on a little bit of a cliffhanger.
For sure, yeah. Kind of a big one.
But yeah, I mean, those were my... I don't remember having any type of really elaborate thoughts for this section. I think it was merely to, connect point A to point B, so to speak.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, we can march on here to the beat of our drum.
All right. Stony sat on the flat-board bed, her long hair in disarray. Gruntle slowly reached out and fixed her hair that was dangling in her face. Stony calls herself an idiot, trying to take out a seer domin with a rapier. A rapier. I don't even know how to say that word. A rapier. She looked up and told Gruntle not to stay with her because she could see what was there in his eyes. She told him to go, leave this room, and let her get cleaned up. She told him not to stay outside her door either because he would never leave. She tells him that he's the best fighter she's ever seen, so he should go kill some Panions. Gruntle was about to ask if she was sure before he was cut off by Stony laughing and telling him to not even try. He grunted and then adjusted and fixed his armor, dropped his visor on his helm, loosened the heavy cutlasses in their scabbards. Stony watched him in silence. Finally, he was ready. He told Stony to take her time, as there will be plenty left when he's done here. Gruntle faced the door, and Stony told him to do some damage. He replied that he will.
That was badass.
Yes, that was really badass. I'm starting to like this different side of Gruntle. Not that I didn't like him before, but I just like his apathy was kind of annoying. But the other thing is she makes this remark that he's the best fighter she's ever seen. And somehow up until now, I really haven't gotten that impression. Even though this was short, it's clear that saving Stony has lit a fire in his belly, letting the beast inside free. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
He's here to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and he's all out of bubble gum.
Right, and then say that's great. They're great, you know.
That was a little heavy-handed, Justin.
Yeah, I hope people get it.
I get it.
Good. But yeah, I guess, can you recall any moments where he's like been the best fighter, or do you think that's purely just because he was holding himself back because of whatever, you know, like trying to save Buke and his attention was focused on other things? I don't know. I guess I just never got the impression up until now that he was a good fighter.
I guess I assumed, they traveled together for a while. She's probably seen him fight in the past, and that's probably where that thought came from.
Gotcha. So I'm just overthinking it.
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, that was just my take on it. That's all.
Gotcha. But also, this reminds me of Chapter 7, when we get that section where Talk is seeing Treach die. And I feel like Kalava, who I'm pretty sure we agreed was the Talani mass bonecaster that was there while Treach was dying. And she like looks into his eyes and says like, oh, who is this that's, awakened you or something like that. I feel like this is Treach. I feel like this is the moment where Treach is reborn. Like this specific moment is where Treach is born. Even potentially at the end of your section 3, where like a cold, what did you say it was? Yeah, there were no words to describe it, no words for what he would become and what he would do. He felt himself growing cold inside. I feel like this is Gruntle unknowingly accepting the role of Treach Reborn.
I have a feeling you're probably right, and I'm excited to read on and get more, I guess, information on that.
Right.
Just to confirm things,
Right, exactly. And I'm really excited for that as well, and I hope I'm right. But again, I don't care if I'm not. I think either way, whether I'm right or not, I'll still have fun and enjoy whatever is to play out with the storyline. But I feel like I am, because from what we know about Fenner is that he's gone. I mean, he's out of the fold because he's essentially just trying to survive whatever is assailing him. Who of the gods is going to rise up to help, right? I mean, Treach is another god of war. Him being reborn is kind of stepping in Fenner's place a little bit. And this also reminds me of a scene that we had with Wrathtrake, right, from the Mass Council, when he's talking to Itkovian, Carnatus, and Brucalion, and he's just like, look, we don't need to compete. Like there never really has been competition between Treach and Fenner, or whatever that was. I feel like that's just was all set up for this point.
I got you.
Yeah, that's all I have to say about that really tiny section.
Well, you did a good job, man. All right. We'll take my next few paragraphs here.
All right.
The Becklites and Scalandi reached the east wall in the thousands, Arrows did not stop the ladders from being raised against the walls. The east gate had been taken again, and the enemy raced down the street to the new East Market Square. The main gate to the south had also fallen, and to the west, the Capustan barracks burned, lightning the sky red. Erdelman and Seerdomen came in from the north and killed everyone in the Nildar camp. The enemy was inside the city on all sides. Hitkovian thought the battle was not going well. I guess that's maybe an understatement. As his messengers returned, he softly gave them orders to carry out troops here and there to support where they were best able. In between messengers, he watched the fighting in the New East Market, what he could see through the smoke and fire anyways. The Scalandi were pushing to destroy the buildings that were keeping them from reaching the prince's palace. The Panions had been hammering the prince's palace with artillery fire, but the walls still held. The Panions were going to have to take it room by room, and they looked eager to start the process. The Grey Sword Trimaster, who oversaw the 1st, 3rd, and 5th wings, had arrived, and he told Itkovian that he had received his orders. Itkovian knew the man knew it was a suicide run. He told the Trimaster that it would be unexpected. The Trimaster agreed and said the night would be chaos in the city, so they would sneak out and destroy their siege weapons and fetch those in the outlying buildings. Itkovian told the man to keep his eyes open. He would like to know the position of the Tenescowri and the troops in the rear. Another messenger came to report and said another Trimaster had encountered a troop of Seerdomen and Erdelmen, and they were all dead. Itkovian couldn't believe it. She told him that a civilian had rallied some Capustan guards and other civilians and fought the Panions and drove them back. The Trimaster there now controls the north gate, and sappers are on their way to repair it. Itkovian asked about this newly formed militia and its commander. She told him there were only a few wounded there to greet the Trimaster. The militia had already moved to the west towards the Lector House, where the Erdelmen were heading. He told the messenger to send the 1st wing in aid, and after delivering the message, to get some rest.
Another shorty. Feel like it's just Itkovian doling out orders. I think it's really cool at the end, interesting and ballsy, right? To try to go rescue the Gidrath from the East Redoubt Tower.
Oh, yeah, for sure, because, I mean, there's obviously a shitload of people outside. You got to cut your way through them and get back, but maybe the risk is worth the reward. I don't know.
Well, and I mean, like, you know, the Panions are so focused on getting into the city that who's watching people trying to get out? Probably not very many people.
Right.
But yeah, I thought that was the coolest part, you know, just the suicide mission, so to speak. But yeah, I didn't have any other thoughts particularly on that section.
No, let's keep her going here. I think we're making pretty good time.
I would say so. Here's another little shorty. Carnatus drew a long breath as hairs on the back of his neck rose at the sudden silence in the great hall. He thought of betrayal. His eyes were drawn to one priest in particular. Wrath-Cruel's words were fuel to suspicions he had already had. But he held his tongue, but his gaze held steady on Wrath-Fenner. The boar's mask held no expression, but his body language told another story. Wrath's Shadow Throne hissed and said that in this age, Cruel is long gone. The robed man replied that he has returned, a fact that should give all of them relief. It is Cruel's blood that has been poisoned, and the battle that has now begun will spare no one, including the gods whom they serve. Wrath, Queen of Dreams, said that his suggestion cannot be done quickly. Wrath Cruel said that he is willing to reconvene, but know that there is very little time. Wrath, Queen of Dreams, said that he had spoken of betrayal. Wrath Cruel said that indeed he did, to which Wrath, Queen of Dreams asked if he was going to, or if he was being divisive. He simply replied and said that those whose conscience are clear will be united. The one that cannot be dealt with by the one that cannot will be dealt with by his god. Wrath, Queen of Dreams asked what he meant by this. Karuli just shrugged. Rucalian took this awkward silence to say that he must depart, as the shield anvil has need of him. Wrathhood said, of course, because based on the sounds from outside, the enemy has breached Capustan's walls. Rucalian smiled and stated that this is what they had expected from the very beginning, and that the walls and the gates would be the first to go. He then turned to Carnatus and asked him if he would join, as he wanted to know the latest information. Carnatus nodded in agreement. Hatan suddenly rose, and she asked Wrathcruel if his god's offer was true. Will he in truth aid us? He replied and said that he indeed does, and asked which of them volunteers. Eyes wide, Hatan snapped her gaze to her brother. The robed man smiled. Brass Shadowthrone seemed to spit out his words of, "What now?" Carnatus turned to study Gafal, who was still seated cross-legged, head bowed in slumber. Wrathcruel suggested that those that valued their lives would not wake Gafal. I guess one of the big ones I had as far as comments here is really at the end here where Wrathcruel's like, "Hey, if you value your lives, don't wake Kafal." And here's my question is, do you think Kafal was speaking to Cruel via Karuli, or is it potentially the spirits of the Barghast? Do you think that when Karuli asks who volunteers, if the Barghast spirits chirped up, and this is why Hatan suddenly rose and asked if Wrathcruel's god's offer was true?
I feel like Kafal would probably be more likely communicating with his spirits, the Barghast spirits, but maybe not. I don't know.
About Wrathcruel's offer?
I don't know. Could just be about, well, how they're going to get the remains and shit out of there. I don't know.
I feel like in a small way, even though it's not really said, but just kind of reading between the lines, I think that Cruel and the Barghast spirits have joined forces.
Could be. I guess we'll have to wait and see what comes out of this, but that's certainly possible.
Well, I think this is the reason why the thrall is essentially protected by some type of sorcery, right? Well, what do we know about the Warrens? Especially Cruel, right? He's poisoned. Can't be his sorcery. It's got to be the Barghast. But they have adamantly said in the past that they are not helping. But here they are, protecting the thrall because the crippled god has no idea about the Barghast spirit and their undead Warren, or their long dead Warren, excuse me.
It's a good point.
Just a thought. Again, I'm probably way out in left field, but the other thing is I'm assuming that we all know who is betraying based on Carnatus's steady gaze on Wrath Fenner, right?
I still wasn't sure, so at some point I was going to ask if you had any ideas. So again, sure. These like details and stuff, I don't always pick up on that.
I'm pretty sure it's Wrath Fenner.
Guess we'll see.
Yeah, but again, that's all I had to say about that section. I thought it was nice that we got a conclusion to the cliffhanger that we had.
Sorry, which cliffhanger?
Where Karuli enters the mass council and says, "One amongst you will betray you."
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, I follow.
So,
all right.
But yeah, outside of that, I'm good to move on.
All right, another shorter one here. A dozen Capustan guards remained out of the 60-ish or so followers Gruntle had led west from the North Gate. He even picked up a Lestari guardsman who became his second in command. The Lestari house was one of the few well-fortified private homes in the city. It belonged to Kalan Da'arl, who had ties to the city council in Darujistan. The building butted up against the north wall, and the stone roof had become a rallying point for troops, and the house itself had other defensive structures. Gruntle and his militia were still recovering from their clash with 15 Erdo men. He lost a lot of men in that scrap, and only his second-in-command showed any mercy, slitting the throats of the Panians who had been scalded with boiling water from the Lestari house. It was oddly quiet once their screams stopped. The breeze brought in the smell of salt, and it also kept the smoke off, in effect driving back the darkness, leaving the fires in the city visible. They looked to the thrall a few streets over as it glowed. His second-in-command figured it was some sort of protective magic and thought they could use some of that themselves, as they just got their asses kicked. He didn't have much left to give, and the rest of the lot, well, they're pretty much done for. Gruntle heard noise above them, and it was half a dozen Capustan regulars looking down at them. They told Gruntle he had done good work, and that the Panians were reeling, and that nearly 1,000 Greyswords had retaken the North Gate. The second-in-command bitched that they were the ones who took the gate. Gruntle reminded him that they didn't hold it, though. He rallied his troops and said they weren't done yet, promoting everyone as they needed to reinforce the West Gate. He jogged ahead, and after a moment, the rest fell in line.
Oh, Gruntle's amassing some followers here.
Yeah, he's got a few. I guess kind of the nature of war. He probably, he lost some guys fighting, and now he's just kind of replenishing his troops. So
Yeah. I just, again, kind of get the feel from the section. We're just kind of getting a little bit of where Grunthal is going and where he's been. It definitely seems like he's viciously going to different parts of the northwestern side and doing what he can to drive the Panions back.
yeah, he's just, like Stoney said, he's out causing some damage.
Yeah. And, here we get kind of a confirmation of the protective magic around the thrall because clearly it's visible. I feel like at this point it's unexpected by all parties involved. I definitely think that it is some Barghast sorcery going on.
Yeah, it seems likely.
Yeah, I don't have any elaborate thoughts on that one either. It's just kind of giving us an insight as to what Gruntle's up to.
Yeah, I don't think there's not really much there. They're just kind of reforming, regrouping, ready to strike out their next objective here. So yeah, if you want to kick off the next one here, we'll keep chugging along.
Awesome. 2 hours before dawn, the battle was diminishing on the north and west side of Capustan. Idkovian's counterattacks reclaimed the gates and walls there for at least the rest of the night. Rocalian had returned from the thrall an hour before with Carnatus. The Mortal Sword had assembled 600 recruits that Shield Anvil had held in reserve, along with 2 mains and 2 wings, and set off towards the Jalarkan concourse, where it was rumored that over 1,000 Becklights had pushed their way into the city. The situation around the West Gate was even more dire, as Idkovian hadn't heard from any of his messengers he had sent over that way. The West barracks were on fire, and the gate was a mere pile of rubble. If the breach was able to reach the west side of Jalarkan's concourse, it would collapse half of the city. Idkovian paced in frustration. He was out of reserve forces, and it appeared that the Capinthal and Greyswords detached the west side and simply ceased to exist. The flood of the Panion encountered a human wall, and the fate of Capustan was left to those defenders. All Idkovian could do was watch. Carnatus was below, exhausting his Denal Warren to heal what he could of the injured Greyswords. He wanted to ask Carnatus about the thrall. Something was happening. The thrall was glowing with some type of colorless penumbra. A messenger climbed the ladder, and the shield anvil turned around. The messenger had been badly burned. Carnatus was behind him and also climbed onto the roof. Idkovian asked the messenger to give his report. The messenger explains that the Panions reached the Talar camp, Sinar camp, and all its inhabitants had been slaughtered. The Jebar tower had been surrounded and being cut down everywhere he looked. As I, the messenger, prepared to return to tell of the news, I was detained by a foreigner that had appeared with half a score of Capan followers. The man took charge of everyone, even myself, the messenger. He continues to explain that the foreigner had his followers break down the doors to Talar camp and demanded its inhabitants come out and fight for their children. Idkovian asked if they did. He explained that the foreigner had a child from Sinar camp in his arms, and this child had been partially eaten. He fell silent, and Carnatus came up and put his hands on the messenger's shoulders in an attempt to get him healed. Idkovian asked if the foreigner was able to convince them. The messenger nodded and explained that the foreigner had taken what was left of the child's tunic and used it as a standard. He begins to explain that there wasn't a shortage of weapons and that the Capinthal Talar armed themselves, and they began returning. With them were the surviving bands of the Capinthal soldiers, a few Gidrath, Corlesian, and Greyswords. The Trimaster had also been killed. Idkovian stated that the foreigner rallied them and then asked what happened next. The messenger said that they rallied to relieve Jebar Tower, and behind that horrible standard, they delivered a slaughter. Idkovian asked what the state of the tower was. It was ruined. There were 20 Capinthal soldiers left. They had rallied with the foreigner. It was then that he was allowed to return to his responsibilities and return. Idkovian said that this was generous of the stranger. He asked what was the position currently of this foreigner and his followers. The messenger explained that they were about to sortie through the rubble of the West Gate. Idkovian was astounded at this and asked why. The messenger said that the Becklight Company was coming to reinforce the attackers inside the city, but those attackers were already dead. So the foreigner thought they'd surprise the reinforcement with that fact. Itkovian asked who this man was. The messenger said he didn't know the man's name, but he fought like a boar with 2 cutlasses. Itkovian stared at the messenger as Carnatus was healing the man. More boots on the ladder were heard, and another messenger had appeared. He explained to Itkovian that the Gidrath from the East Watch redoubt had been recovered. The Trimaster has sent out a scout. The Tenescowri are on the move. Itkovian nodded and thought to himself that the mass would hit by dawn, all 300,000 of them. He turned to Carnatus and told him to open the tunnels. Begin with the inner camps. Every citizen is to go below. Carnatus said to Itkovian that the Mass Council has yet to approve of the tunnels. Itkovian nodded and said that they don't always need approval, as it seems the Mass Council had already found a way to protect themselves. Carnatus explained that it wasn't the Mass Council, but Hatan and Kafal, and a merchant, one he had saved out on the plain. The shield anvil blinked and asked if this merchant had a caravan guard, one with cutlasses. Carnatus said that he was right, and just the day before he had healed that man for being hungover. Itkovian said that he saw and to carry on. He then told his messengers to get word to the Mortal Sword and his foreigner. A lot of relaying of information there. This is more just kind of a military semantics thing. I don't know what 2 mains and 2 wings exactly means as far as like a military formation. And I'm just
I don't think it is.
Oh, it's
I think that's like their military like units. That's just what they call them.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Easily explained.
So, I didn't mean to jump in front of you while you were talking there, but
no, that's perfect. I was just like, for some reason, I thought they were like formations. Like I know that like some like airplane pilots, when they're in formation, there's like a wing formation. So I didn't know.
Sure.
I didn't know if it was like referring to that or what, but no, I appreciate that clarity.
Because when Itkovian, when they were dealing with the Kachain Shabal, he had wings. I think those must be like the mounted like cavalry.
Right.
I don't know. I guess like mains, I could think would, like a horse's mane makes me think of that. So I don't know if it's a different type of mounted cavalry or if it's just not. I don't know.
Or is it
they
just
call
like,
mains for something else? I don't know.
Gotcha. I just, for whatever reason, I thought mains were like the head and the wings were off to its side.
Gotcha.
One thing that I forgot to talk about as far as the penumbra, the colorless penumbra over the thrall, was that I definitely, again, I think it's Barghast, but I think that it's merely just to protect their ancestors' bones. I don't think that it's necessarily a way of helping Capustan. I mean, it does kind of indirectly because I would assume that this sorcery is not, it's like a force field, so to speak.
You think everybody's going to like shack up in that building then?
Well, that and the tunnels.
Right. Yeah.
Probably. I mean, if all else fails, right, and the Panions slowly start to take more and more of like the outer ring of the city, then yeah, I could see that being a place where you hole up.
Right.
But also, speaking of the tunnels, that's the shaved knuckle that Prince Jalarkin was talking about.
Okay. That makes sense.
So
I did, yeah. I'll agree with that. Makes sense.
So, and my guess is the Grey Swords held it from him because he would have told the Mass Council, who, as we are told, hadn't approved of that yet.
Right. But I don't know, like, why the hell wouldn't you? Like, what is the harm?
I don't know. I think the Mass Council just has different prerogatives.
Yeah, true. But even as just like a safety measure, why wouldn't you be like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. We can, people can hide down there. At least, if anything, I mean, it's kind of a choke point if you have to fight in the tunnels.
Right, and they do mention that later, that it's easily defendable. The other thing that I didn't catch on my first read was this whole child that had been partially eaten that Gruntle just kind of uses as a standard. Not the child itself, but, the clothes from the child. And honestly, it's kind of like the sweetest way to rebel against the Panions. Right? Like, here's this tunic from this half-eaten child. Like, fuck you guys. We're going to ride to this.
It's, it should get some emotions going.
For sure. Again, we know that the East Watch redoubt, that suicide mission, it was successful, right? Like, they were able to get those guys out. I'm assuming the redoubt fell at that point, but they were able to go retrieve those guards,
Yeah, it worked. And they got a read on the Tenescowri.
which I think definitely helped in communicating all these things. The last thing that I had was just Shield Anvil and Carnatus when they were talking about the merchant caravan guard. Obviously, Gruntle. Idkovian had met him out on the plains after they were attacked by the Cal Hunters when they were with Boshalane and Corval Broach. And it was cool to see him connect the dots. How interesting that was. He like now has a face to this like foreigner, right?
Right, yeah. Who's, kind of a badass from what we're finding out here.
Exactly. But yeah, those are all the thoughts that I had about that section.
All right, shorter one for me here. The Becklite's shield exploded from Gruntle's savage swing. Blood and gore covered his cutlass while his other sword came down on the soldier's head, splitting his helm and spraying brain everywhere. Gruntle spun around. He was a solid dozen paces ahead of his little militia, the child's standard now more red than yellow, and even now it started to turn magenta. The Becklite Company had been destroyed. The fellow Gruntle had just butchered had been the last of them. Gruntle and his crew were 40 paces from what was left of the West Gate on the wide main avenue of what used to be a shanty town. There were no structures left. Broken pottery was all that was left. 200 paces west of that were the picket lines on the Panions massing in the dawn. Gruntle saw roughly 500 Becklites gathering on the edge, flanked by Erdomen and Betrulid light cavalry. Behind them rose a cloud of dust, turned gold by the slanting sun. His lieutenant knelt next to him, trying to catch his breath, and struggled to speak, saying it was time to withdraw. Gruntle looked at his ragtag group of fighters, noting he had 50, 60 still standing. He tried to remember what he had started the night with. He thought about the same number. Gruntle asked where the sergeants were. The lieutenant said they were mostly there and asked if Gruntle wanted them called forward. Gruntle told him to have them assemble into squads. The lieutenant said they would be fucked if the cavalry rushed them. Gruntle said they wouldn't do that. They were masking for the Tenescowri. It was time to let the seasoned soldiers rest and release the starving horde. The lieutenant couldn't believe it. Gruntle told him not to worry. They die easy. The lieutenant said they needed rest. They had been cut to pieces, and he, for one, was too old for a suicide stand. Gruntle asked what the hell he was doing in Capustan if that was the case. Gruntle wanted the squads to strip armor from the dead. He wanted them to look like soldiers. Then they would withdraw and rest.
Awesome.
Yeah, not really a lot here. Just, kind of the aftermath of some fighting and, again, moving on. And I'm sure the 50 or 60 guys he's got are probably not the same that he started with. He's just replying. Yeah, the Tenescowri are coming in, and that'll be interesting. I wonder if we'll see that in the next chapter. Or if we'll go back to like Whiskey Jack and those guys or not. We'll have to find out.
Yeah, for sure.
My one thought here, and I didn't catch this right away, but, when I was summarizing and rereading it, Gruntle, he wants the squad to strip armor from the dead. He wanted them to look like soldiers. So I wonder if he must have some sort of sneak attack plan. He's going to blend in and, get in the middle of them and just try to cut them to pieces, or what he's going to do. I don't know.
Kind of like a Trojan horse type of thing. Because, what do the Tenescowri know, right? They just know what armor to look for, I would imagine.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I was going to say they must not really care, but it's not like they're outside there fighting their own. So, yeah, you're probably right.
That's a good catch. I didn't catch that until you said that.
We'll see. Maybe it's nothing, but that's just kind of what it made me think of.
I think that you're probably right.
We shall see.
All right. Well, yeah, I don't have any other thoughts for that section.
Yeah, let's keep it rolling here.
All right. Gruntle led his battered company back towards the rubble of Westgate. Gray swords dominated the crowd. The activity slowed, and heads turned his way. Gruntle scowl deepened and thought to himself that they must be ghosts in a sarcastic way. Eyes of the crowd went straight to the standard he was carrying. A woman officer strode forward to meet him. She welcomed him back and said that they have weaponsmiths to set up outside Tullar camp and suggests that he gets his tusks sharpened. He called them cutlasses as he stepped past her. She turned and asked what they would all like to know, and that was his name. He spoke over his shoulder and said to call them Tiger Claws. And it appears that there's a gate to rebuild. The Tenescowri are on the move, and they want breakfast. The sounds of battle were heard in the direction of the Jalarkan concourse. He told the soldiers to line up and get their blades sharpened. A rider driving his horse was seen riding hard down the street. He reined in, dismounted, and walked up to Gruntle. He asked Gruntle if he was Caruli's caravan captain. Gruntle said that he was, but what did he want? The messenger said that he brings compliments from the shield anvil and said that the Tenescowri were massing. Gruntle tells the man that he was aware. The man explains that the shield anvil believes that the main assault will be from the east because the first child has assembled his vanguard there. Gruntle said that this was fine, and what of it? The messenger was silent for a moment and said the citizens of Capustan are being removed to the tunnels that were constructed by the Grey Swords. Gruntle asked for how long. The messenger replied for 2 weeks, potentially 3. Gruntle said that this takes care of the non-combatants, but what about us fighters? The messenger told Gruntle that they would fight street by street and building by building. The shield anvil inquires which part of the city did he wish to occupy, and if there's anything Gruntle requires. Gruntle listed off what he wanted and told the messenger that he would start at the north and make his way back to a tenement just off of Old Daru Street. The lieutenant came back to Gruntle's side and told him it was time to sharpen his tiger claws. Gruntle did not notice the messenger's head jerk back at the lieutenant's words. All right. My first is just about the tunnels. I thought that this was a cool and kind of like what we talked about before. Apparently, there were more empty barrows than anticipated, and they are easily defensible. So this kind of takes us back to a little bit of the history that we got of Capustan, where there are a bunch of like Barghast graves, because it essentially was a burial ground for the Barghast before the city was built. So they're essentially using those barrows as tunnels. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was. I mean, hey, find a way to make some use of them.
Right. And the other comment that I had was just about the conversation that took place between Ikovian, Arnatus, and Rukalian with the Mass Council when Wrath Treach was talking to them about not fighting each other, but rather like working together or something like that. I made mention of it earlier, but that also reminded me of that. Sharpen his tiger claws. Treach is coming out, man.
The kitty is showing his claws.
Right. Feel like that comment kind of leads us into our next section here.
All right. Another short one here. Itkovian studied the massive caravan captain through the cage of his visor. Itkovian had come to meet the man himself, to get a true opinion of the man, and to put a face to what he's heard of his extraordinary accomplishments and talents. Itkovian thought about what he had heard, that the man fights like a boar. He's the size of a God's damned plain cat. He's big, but he moves with grace as well. Fenner saved them all. The tiger of summer's ghost walks in his shadow. He returned to his horse, and Itkovian got into the saddle, thinking to himself, the truth had suddenly hit him hard. On this day, their last day, he had met this unnamed man, a servant of Treach, the tiger of summer, Treach ascending, and Fenner, the brutal boar whose savage cunning rides his soul. What of his lord? Fenner, descending, on their last day. He heard a roar rise up in the distance on all sides. He kicked his heels into the horse and set it into motion, while he said, twin tusks, guard us.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of foreshadowing in here. What specifically? Again, what we've predicted already is that Treach is going to kind of take Fenner's place, but not really. Like, not as far as like a, haha, I came in first, you came in second type of competition thing. But I think that because Fenner descending, right? I mean, Fenner's not there. He's absentee, that theory, and Treach is going to kind of take over and fight.
Ascend,
right.
Yeah, it seems to make sense to me.
All right. My last section here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is your last one, right?
Yep. And this one I had a fair amount of comments for, but yeah, I think the one after that is pretty short too, so it's smooth sailing from here on out.
Here we go.
All right. Exhausted, Buke made his way back to the necromancer's estate. It was large, standing on a low hill that looked too regular to be natural, surrounded by high walls with fake towers at the corners. A grand entrance faced the street, and the gate was a mini version of the thralls. A fireball had struck the gate, leaving it to ruins, but the frame that held it remained upright. As Buke limped up the ramp toward it, he was startled by a sudden exit of a tall, gaunt man hobbling like a vulture. The man stopped and turned around to tell Buke that he is second only to Wrath Shadowthrone. Does Buke not know who he is? Do they not know him? He tells Buke his name is Marble. He gripes about how the necromancers have booted him out. Buke tells Marble that he isn't one who should irritate the necromancers. Marble tells Buke that when Wrath Shadowthrone hears of this, then the shadows will truly fall. With a snarl, the priest stomped down the walkway. Buke paused and watched as the man turned the corner. Hours earlier, Buke had been helping people from the camps in the Daru district make their way to the tunnels the Greyswords had provided. He continued to walk through the Scorched Gate and realized that he may never again leave this estate. He hesitated at that thought of this, but realized it was too late, as Bauchelain was standing in the courtyard. Bauchelain greeted him and asked where Buke had been. Buke apologized and said that he had delivered the tax exemption notice to the Daru civic authorities. But whether siege or not, taxes are due. Bauchelain made a comment about the evacuation and the tunnels and said that this was clever and that they had declined the offer. Buke found himself turning to look at the half-score of Erdelman bodies lying on all sides. Bauchelain explains that the Erdelmen rushed without consideration and that they were misguided. Corporal Broach was delighted, though, and made preparations to recruit them. Buke questioned this, but understood a moment later. They sat looking at each other for a brief moment before Bauchelain tells Buke that the Tenescowri were coming and how extraordinary these children were. He said that he looks forward to meeting the eldest of them all. Corporal is especially looking forward to this Annister character and wishes to conduct studies of his biology. He admits that even he is curious about this. The fallen Erdelmen suddenly twisted as one, hands clawing for their dropped weapons, helmed heads lifting. Buke only could watch in horror. Bauchelain tells Buke that now he's got guards to command and suggests that he post them at the entrance and the four towers. They were tireless defenders, the best kind. Emancipor Reese then came out and walked up to one of the dead Erdelmen, feeling underneath the armor and clothes. After a moment, he stepped back in exclamation. He asked Bauchelain how he had done it. There were hearts on the kitchen table all sewn together, but there was no wound. Bauchelain frankly said that with him and Buke interfering with Broach's nightly routine, Corporal had to modify his habits. Now he has no reason to leave his room to satisfy what he acquires. Bauchelain said that nonetheless, to desist in their misguided efforts, his eyes fixed on Buke. As far as the priest Caruli's sorcery goes, Buke does not need to unveil it, but they dislike company in their soul-taken forms. Bauchelain commanded Emancipor to lend a shoulder to their guard. The old man got close to Buke and told Buke that it was madness. He asked what Caruli did to Buke. Buke growled and told him to shove it, as he knew that they were soul-taken but failed to mention that. But Caruli knew as well. Bauchelain left them and walked toward the main house. Buke gripped Mancy's tunic and told him that he can follow them now. He can follow the two anywhere. Mancy replied that they would kill him and called him a hood-damned idiot. Buke managed a sickly grin. A distant roar interrupted them. Reese said that it was the Tenescowri. Buke's attention was drawn elsewhere, to the main building's square tower, to the shutters on top, where two rooks now perched. Buke mutters to himself that he sees them and guesses that they are going after Annister. The rooks took off southeast. Buke pushed Reese away and said that he can follow them. Caruli's sweet gift. He thought to himself about the sweet gift of Caruli. Flight away from all that he was, free from his burdens, able to follow those two dreaded creatures. He felt himself veering. Reese watched as Buke turned into a sparrowhawk and shot himself upward into the sky. Mancy muttered that yes, Buke will be faster, but when the necromancers decided to take him down, they won't need speed or agility. It will be sorcery that takes him out. Those gifts will not help Buke then. He calls him a fool, a poor fool. So, damn, I really liked this section. I wasn't really expecting it, but yeah, The first thing that I had here is when Marble just kind of suddenly appears. I thought that this was weird to me, and my guess is that this guy was in some type of warren potentially, or the house, Boschling and Corporal Broach's estate, is protected by some illusion, and the gate is the boundary. Like it just was weird. Like he's walking to the gate, and inside of the compound is like the main structure. And as he like enters the threshold, Marble comes out. It was weird.
Yeah, it was weird.
But Marble, and I think this is from when Wrath's Shadow Throne was talking to Berkalion and the Thrall a couple of chapters ago, like during the excavation of the Barghast bones. When Wrath's Shadow Throne asks the Mortal Sword what these necromancers were all about, the Mortal Sword was like, I don't know. Maybe you should go find out. I think that this, is Wrath's Shadow Throne trying to find out. And he clearly gets the boot. So I just thought that was a kind of a cool detail. I mean, it didn't necessarily have to be explained, but it was cool that it was.
For sure.
When Boschling had greeted Buke, I thought it was interesting because in that initial interaction, Boschling says erstwhile, which means past. He says like, "Oh, where has my erstwhile employee been?" So is Buke not employed by them anymore? I didn't really get that sense, though.
I guess I don't remember. Oh, Butte? Well, maybe I was thinking of Emancipor. I don't know. Yeah, I thought he left their service, I thought, when they got to the city. Or maybe I'm thinking of Curly. I don't know. It sounds vaguely familiar.
So I just thought it was like a weird term, but maybe I'm not interpreting it correctly. What I did find was funny is that just this whole like whether there's a siege or not, like taxes are due, but fortunately for the necromancers, there was nobody to collect the taxes.
Yeah, like this is what you're worried about right now?
Yeah.
I agree. It was silly.
But man, this like these dead Erdomen being like reanimated, and my guess is Corporal Broach had sewn all their hearts together on the kitchen table inside, and now they're reanimated. And I'm also wondering if this is just purely to defend their estate. But imagine if the Panions manage to irritate the necromancers even more than they probably already have. Then could this tactic of raising the dead Panions be used to help secure Capustan? Like, that would be pretty fucking cool, right? I hope that comes to fruition.
I wonder if, like, how many could they control or, like, raise up? I wonder what kind of limit, if that happens, what kind of limit they might have. Like, how strong is their power and everything.
Right. Can you imagine it'd be a race against how fast a Tenescowri could devour bodies?
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't think that Boschling and Corporal Broach could be soul taken. I don't know why that thought just like never crossed my mind.
It didn't cross my mind either, just because I don't think there's been any hint towards it, or we both missed it. But yeah, there was. I don't really feel like there was any reason for us to suspect that.
Right. But also kind of feel like these guys are really old. I don't know what gives me.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that these guys are potentially survivors from like the First Empire?
I don't know where or when they're from, but I wonder if that's, if we'll get some of that info in the novellas.
I think we will. And then the last thing that I had was I thought it was cool that Caruli's sweet gift, him being able to soul take into a hawk, right? Whether that is like a permanent change, I don't know, but I think it's cool that we get that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I remember reading that. I'm like, oh, that's fucking cool. Like, that's what that concoction did.
Yeah, that muddy water.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess I'm really excited. Just the whole premise of Corporal Broach bringing back dead Panions to potentially fight against the Panions. I think that would be fucking cool.
Yeah, that would be. You could fight your way out that way, or it would help.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I thought that was a really interesting section, and the last section here is nicely caps it off.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll bring it home here. I feel like it's been a little while since I've finished a chapter, but maybe it's not. Just feels that way to me. And I know I've probably said that not long ago too.
Yeah.
High above Capustan, Buke circled in the air as a sparrowhawk. Bauchelane and Corporal Broach were well below him and visible in their soul-taken forms, past the east gate. The single bird studied the siege from the sky, a vantage point any general would kill for. The Tenescowri wrapped themselves around the city, perhaps 1/3 people, maybe even more than that. Buke had never seen such a mass of people. He knew there would be no stopping this assault. This army didn't measure itself on bravery, but on something far deadlier, something unstoppable: hunger. Capustan was about to be devoured. Buke thought to himself, the Panion Seer is a monster, a tyranny of need, and this will spread. Defeat him? You will have to kill every man, woman, and child in this world who are bowed to hunger. Everyone who faces starvation's grisly grin. It has begun here, on Genebacchus. But that is simply the heart. This tide will spread. It will infect every city, on every continent. It will devour nations and empires from within. I see you now, Seer, from this height. I understand what you are and what you will become. We are all lost. We are truly lost. A boom of sorcery to the east drew his attention. A knot of familiar magic swirled around a small section of the Tenescowri, cutting down hundreds of them. Demons burst from torn portals in the air, wreaking havoc on the horde's ranks. Magic shot back at the mages' soul-taken forms. The mages converged on a man on a bucking horse. Waves of magic collided and created a thunderous boom that Buke was able to hear at his height. Magic hammered the mages, and they made a quick retreat. The man on the horse was untouched, but surrounded by bodies that the Tenescowri now tore into. Buke made it back to the estate before the two mages and returned back to his natural form. Reese was nowhere to be seen. The undead Erdoman guards were still in place. Buke ordered the guards to new positions. Bauchelane and Corporal Broach had returned and changed back into themselves. They both looked like shit, and Bauchelane said it was patient of him to wait for them to return. Buke wiped the smile from his face and asked what had happened. They didn't get him? Bauchelane said they needed to refine their tactics. Buke softly laughed. Bauchelane froze and bid him a good day and went inside.
Whew, we did it, man. We did it.
Yeah, it was a pretty big chapter to start the sub-book off.
Yes, it was.
This was a pretty cool little section at the end here. I only had a couple thoughts. You know, it's like every time we get a number on the Tenescowri, it just seems to grow and grow and grow. And so now, you know, we got Buke up above, and it's, you know, it's 1/3 people, 300,000 plus people, or maybe even more than that, you know, like it's just insane. I think about, like, that's, you know, Minneapolis, like everybody in Minneapolis wrapped around, I don't know, like fucking St. Clair where I live, you know, a town of 800 people. Be insane.
Astronomically insane, for sure. Yeah, dude.
Yeah, it's hard to, like, I mean, even like you think about like some of these college football stadiums like Michigan, Ohio State, you know, they hold 100,000 people. Like, that's an insane amount of people. And I mean, you'd have to multiply that by like 3 to have, you know, about the same amount.
Right.
Yeah, hard to wrap your head around. When I was reading this paragraph, you know, Buke's, you know, he's thinking to himself, and I was just like, well, duh, he's a bird and he's in the sky, so who's he going to talk to? I don't know why. It was just like,
just one of
you know,
your,
I don't know, it was just like a dumb thought that popped into my head, but
it's a little sick, but hey, it works.
Just how my mind works sometimes. And then my last thought here, did we know that the Panions had mages? I'm not remembering that.
No, I think that's meant to be. I mean, yes, the Panions did have mages. I feel like it's left ambiguous for a reason.
Gotcha. Okay. I just didn't really remember hearing about them before. That's all.
Yeah, they were talked about a little bit in chapter 12 when Talk was talking about how the Panions had to basically unleash 3 separate armies on Lady Envy and the Segula tool. It was said that
I remember that. I guess I
Yeah.
don't remember mages being brought up there, but I do. Yeah, I remember that part. Well, any other lasting thoughts here?
Not at all. It was a very intense chapter, and when I first read it, I mean, not that I was confused or anything, but I appreciated the clarity I had when I summarized it, and then as well as I read through it after I'd gotten done summarizing it. So I definitely did not feel ready to record this episode, but
Really? I didn't get that. I did not get that sense from you at all. I didn't feel like that. You were unprepared or anything?
Yeah, I felt unprepared all last week while I was sick. I mean, I was totally behind on my summaries. I had lots of in-depth stuff to write, and I don't summarize very quickly. So I feel like I'm reading a sentence, jotting what I would summarize that sentence to be, opening up the book, reading another sentence, summarizing what that sentence would be, reading to see what I can and can't summarize, what I can leave out, what I can't leave out. So I felt, yes, very behind.
Well, I thought you did good, man.
Appreciate it, sir.
It'd be good to read on. I don't know if I'm going to read tonight since it's a little after 10 here now, but
I probably will a little bit. I won't go to bed for probably another couple hours.
Well, I got my parents' dog here for another 6 days, and she likes to get up at anywhere from 3:45 to 5:30 to get up and go out to the bathroom. So
Makes sense.
yeah,
Dogs gotta pee.
yeah, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to come next and where things are going to go and what we're going to have next year. But man, I really don't know how I see this going forward. Like, I don't know what to think because the city seems pretty fucked.
Yeah, it definitely does seem fucked. My guess is that Capustan will hold out almost to like the bitter end at the last thread, so to speak, before the Malazans arrive.
They may, yeah, I don't know. I'm just so unsure. I can see that happening and I could see it not happening too. But then I don't really, I mean, either way, I don't really know what's going to happen. So I guess that's why we got to read the books.
Right. Well, I mean, we're nearing halfway, right? Like we're already at least halfway through it. So I would imagine it's going to kind of be continuing to go uphill, so to speak.
We'll find out soon. But
Yeah.
I guess before we go, make sure you check us out on YouTube. Yeah, what'd you say we're at, like 175, Justin?
Yep.
Yeah, it'd be cool to get to 200. If you're following us everywhere else, you may as well follow us on YouTube too. Twitter, all that good stuff. Send us a tweet. I like interacting with people and meeting people and stuff. Send us an email, whatever you want to do. Just shoot something our way and we'll converse or whatever. We'll do something.
Hell yeah. That sounds like a blast.
All right, man. Well, I got my cat climbing out the back of my computer here right now, so I don't know what her deal is right now. She's getting a little feisty.
She wants your attention.
She does. She's hiding now. All right, man. Well, I hope you have a good night, and we will read on and find out and do this again sometime soon.
Fuck yeah, dude.
All right. Well, talk to you later, buddy.
All right, later, man. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
DMJ's Epic Quest. DMJ's Epic Quest. DMJ's CNJ's Epic Quest. CNJ's Epic Quest.